Grandma always said October wasn't the end of gardening, it was the start of the next season. While the air turned cold, she planted, mulched, and tucked crops in for winter. Those simple October habits still work today, and we're going to show you. Here are 20 forgotten planting tricks that can carry a garden through the frost and into spring. Number 6 is definitely one you want to know. Plant garlic before the first frost. We're kicking off with a trick you should try if you want to grow your own garlic at home. Grandma always said garlic was a crop of patience. While most folks were putting their gardens to bed in October, she was pressing cloves deep into the soil just before the first frost. The garden looked quiet on the surface, but beneath the earth, those cloves were busy sending out roots while the snow covered the beds. By spring, those roots were already working, ready to push up green shoots as soon as the days warmed. You remember the smell of garlic from Grandma's kitchen, sharp and earthy, drifting from stews or roasted meats, was part of fall itself. Each one started with a little October planting. Even today, gardeners know that garlic planted late, after the ground hardens, never grows as well. The trick still works, just as it always did. Plant in October, cover with straw or leaves, and let the frost do the work for you. Plant onions from sets in October. Small onion bulbs, no bigger than marbles, went into October soil in gardens that followed the old calendar. Most people plant onions in spring, but fall planting gives them months to establish strong root systems before winter locks the ground. Those tiny sets nestle into the earth and survive the freeze because they're already anchored deep when the cold arrives. Come spring, they're already growing, while spring-planted onions are just getting started. By early summer, you're pulling full-sized bulbs weeks ahead of everyone else. The timing matters more than anything fancy. Plant too early and they might sprout before winter. Too late and they won't root properly. October hits that sweet spot where the soil is still workable but cool enough to keep the sets dormant until spring. Cover the soil with hay or leaves. This is one of those, I know it tip, but it's more than what you think. Before the ground froze, our grandparents spread a layer of hay or raked leaves across the garden beds. This simple cover shielded the soil from the harshness of winter, keeping it from washing away in rain or breaking apart with the freeze and thaw. Root crops like beets or carrots hidden below stayed insulated, while perennials waiting underground were less likely to suffer damage. The cover also trapped bits of moisture and slowly broke down over the months, turning into a layer of dark, rich matter by spring. Children often helped rake piles of leaves from the yard, dragging them to the garden and laughing as the wind tried to carry them off again. By the time snow settled, the beds looked tucked in, safe beneath their quilt of leaves and hay, resting quietly until spring returned. Direct-Sow hardy greens. Here's something most modern gardeners miss. Spinach, kale, and arugula can be planted directly into October soil. Grandma would work the cold ground while her breath fogged in the morning air, scattering seeds in shallow rows. The key is knowing these seeds won't germinate right away. They sit dormant through the harsh freezes, then spring to life when late winter brings just enough soil warmth. This gives them a massive head start over spring-planted greens. By the time your neighbors are just putting seeds in the ground, yours are already producing tender leaves. The science behind it is simple. Cold temperatures convert the plant starches into sugars, making them sweeter and more flavorful. No special equipment needed, just seeds and timing. If you try this method, you'll have fresh salads ready weeks earlier than anyone else on your block. Mulch late-planted carrots. Carrots planted in late summer often stayed in the ground well into October and beyond. The trick was covering them with a thick layer of straw or dried leaves before the ground froze solid. This mulch blanket prevented the soil from heaving during freeze-thaw cycles, which could crack the carrots or push them right out of the earth. Grandpa would pile it on thick, then mark the rows with stakes so he could find them under snow. When fresh vegetables were needed in January, he'd brush away the snow and mulch, pull what was needed, then cover everything back up. The cold actually improved the carrots, triggering them to convert stored starches into sugars as a natural antifreeze. They came out of the ground sweeter than any summer carrot. It was nature's root cellar, requiring nothing but some old hay and a little planting ahead. Save seeds from frost-hardy plants. October wasn't only about planting, it was also the time to save seed for the year ahead. Frost-hardy crops like kale, mustard, and spinach often held their seed pods well into autumn, long after softer plants had withered. Gardeners let the pods dry on the stalk, the brittle shells rattling in the breeze like tiny maracas. Once dry, the seeds were shaken loose into paper envelopes or glass jars, each carefully labeled and tucked onto a pantry shelf. Saving seed was a way to stretch the garden's gifts without spending money come spring. Children sometimes helped by rubbing pods between their palms, laughing at how many seeds spilled out. By winter, those small jars represented security. When the snow melted, the family wasn't starting from nothing. The next garden was already waiting in a handful of seeds. Sow cover crops in October. Growing up, gardens were never left empty once the harvest was over. By October, families often scattered seed across bare soil, knowing that winter, rye, clover, or vetch would guard the ground. Instead of weeds creeping in or rain washing the soil away, these crops held everything in place through winter. When spring returned, they were turned back into the earth, releasing nutrients that fed the next year's vegetables. It was a simple cycle that required no store-bought fertilizer and no extra cost. Many remember fields edged with rye standing tall against the frost, or clover brightening gray autumn days. These weren't weeds to fight against, but allies planted on purpose. Even now, sowing cover crops in October is one of the surest ways to keep your soil alive and ready for planting when winter ends. Harden off seedlings in cold frames. Cold frames were common in October gardens, simple wooden boxes with glass or old window panes propped on top. Young seedlings of lettuce, cabbage, and other hardy crops spent their days inside these frames, absorbing whatever warmth the autumn sun still offered. At night, the lid came down, trapping heat and shielding tender plants from sudden frosts. Over several weeks, this gradual exposure toughened the seedlings at the cellular level, teaching them to survive temperatures that would have killed them if transplanted directly into open ground. The process mimics what happens naturally with wild plants, but speeds it up in a controlled way. By the time deep winter settled in, those plants were ready to handle whatever came next. The cold frame remains one of the most reliable methods for extending your growing season without the need for electricity or complicated heating systems. Layer straw around brassicas, cabbage, cauliflower, and broccoli could survive a light frost on their leaves. But their roots were another story. Once the ground froze solid, the plants were done. The answer was straw. In October, bales came out of the barn and were spread thick across the rows, sometimes nearly a foot deep. The straw kept the soil steady through freezing nights, stopping the ground from heaving and pushing the plants out. It also held just enough warmth for the roots to stay alive until spring. Children often helped scatter the straw, turning the rows into golden mounds before winter set in. Come spring, the plants were still anchored firmly in place, ready to keep growing. By then, the straw had already started breaking down, adding fresh organic matter back into the soil for the season ahead. Direct-Sow peas for early spring. One of the smartest October tricks was tucking pea seeds into the soil before winter. The ground was cool but still workable, and the seeds rested there quietly until the first thaw. Instead of waiting for spring planting, peas were already in place, ready to sprout as soon as the soil warmed. Families often scratched shallow rows, dropped in the seeds, and covered them with a thin layer of earth and straw. Snow and frost acted as a blanket, keeping the seeds safe until nature gave the signal. By early spring, green shoots appeared weeks ahead of normal planting, giving an early harvest when fresh. Food was rare. It was a simple way to get a head start, and it meant sweet pods on the table long before most gardens had even woken up. Plant radishes and turnips for fall and winter harvest. October was never too late for fast roots like radishes and turnips. They thrived in cool soil, sprouting quickly when most other vegetables had already quit for the season. A row planted in early October could still produce crisp radishes within a few weeks, their red skins bright against the fading garden. Turnips dug in deeper, building firm bulbs that held well into winter with just a cover of straw or dry leaves. Families counted on them because they were dependable and easy, turning bare ground into food before snow set in. Children often pulled radishes straight from the soil, rinsing them in a bucket before supper, while turnips went into hearty stews that lasted for days. Even after frost, both crops turned sweeter, making them worth planting late when every extra harvest mattered. Planting hope beneath the frost. October was always the right time for bulbs, like tulips and daffodils. The soil was cool, but not yet frozen, giving roots a chance to dig in before winter. Our grandparents knew that planting now meant color waiting under the ground while snow still covered everything. Bulbs tucked a few inches deep held steady through ice and frost, then pushed up bright shoots at the first sign of spring. The work was simple: dig a hole, drop the bulb, and cover it back over. Children often helped by carrying baskets of bulbs, their hands dusted with dry soil as they set them one by one. By March or April, the reward came in bright blossoms that made the yard feel alive again. Each bloom was proof that a little effort in October carried beauty through the bleakest months. Plant spring-flowering bulbs. As the leaves fell and the air turned crisp, tulip and daffodil bulbs were planted deep into the soil. The timing mattered because cool earth gave them a chance to set roots before winter froze the ground solid. Our grandparents buried them just a few inches so the bulbs stayed protected beneath frost and snow, waiting quietly for spring. By the time the first warm days arrived, green shoots pierced through the soil, bringing color to gardens that had been bare for months. Planting was simple: dig a hole, drop the bulb, and cover it back with earth. Most times, the best approach was to place them in clusters, so that when spring came, patches of bright blossoms appeared all at once. It was a small job in October that promised beauty after the hardest season had passed. Use row covers for late lettuce and greens. When the first frost touched the garden, it didn't always mean the greens had to stop. A simple row cover could stretch the harvest weeks beyond its usual end. Old sheets, burlap, or canvas stretched across bent branches or hoops made a small shelter that trapped warmth and kept the frost off. Families counted on it in October, knowing that tender leaves like spinach or arugula could keep producing even as the nights dipped below freezing. The covers lifted easily in the day so sunlight could reach the plants, then dropped back down before dark, like tucking the rows into bed. On cold mornings, lifting a corner to find crisp leaves under the shelter felt like a small victory. While the yard turned brown and stiff with frost, the garden still offered bowls of fresh salad for the table. Transplant young trees or shrubs. Cool autumn days gave roots a chance to grow while branches and leaves had already slowed down. That made it the best season to move young trees and shrubs into their permanent places. Families dug up apple whips, berry canes, or lilac starts and replanted them where they could thrive. The chill air kept plants from wilting, and steady rains did the watering without much help. Holes were dug wide, roots spread gently, and soil pressed firm so there were no air gaps. A thick mulch of leaves or straw covered the base to slow the freeze. By the time spring returned, those roots had already taken hold, ready to send up strong shoots. Shifting plants in autumn turned bare yards into orchards and hedges, work done once that paid back for generations. Plant garlic chives and perennial herbs. Some plants were best started in the cool of fall, when they could settle in before the ground froze. Garlic chives were a favorite, their slender leaves pushing up early in spring when little else was ready. Alongside them went hardy herbs like thyme, sage, and oregano, each able to survive a winter under a light mulch. Families often marked a corner of the garden just for these perennials, knowing they would come back year after year with little effort. The trick was simple. Plant in October, keep the soil covered, and let the roots do their work quietly through the cold months. By the time the snow melted, fresh shoots appeared without the need to start from seed again. It was a way of saving time and money, turning one season's planting into food that lasted for many more. Plant leeks for overwintering leeks were one of those crops that handled the cold better than most, which made October the right time to plant them. Small seedlings went into deep furrows, and soil pulled up around their stems to keep them long and white. Once settled, they hardly minded the frost. A layer of straw or leaves kept the ground workable, so leeks could be dug as needed all through winter and early spring. Families liked them because they stretched meals, their mild onion flavor turning broths and stews into filling suppers. Some stayed in the ground until March, ready whenever the kitchen called for them. Unlike onions that had to be dried and stored, leeks stood upright in the soil like a living pantry. A little planting in October gave months of food without the worry of spoilage. Start winter Rodicchio and Chicory indoors. For families who wanted fresh greens deep into winter, Rodicchio and Chicory were started indoors in October. Seeds were sown in shallow boxes or clay pots, often set near windows where they caught the low autumn sun. These hardy plants sprouted easily in the cooler air of fall and were later transplanted into cold frames or sheltered garden beds. The steady chill gave their leaves a stronger flavor, turning crisp and slightly bitter, perfect for hearty winter salads. Growing them this way meant there was something fresh when most gardens lay frozen under snow. Rodicchio heads glowed red against the dull earth, while Chicory brought pale greens and crunchy stems to the table. Families valued them because they kept producing even in short days. It was a small effort in October that guaranteed the kitchen had living greens through months when food was often scarce. Plant hardy flowers like Pansies and Violas. Not every October planting was about food. Families also set out Pansies and Violas, flowers that could face frost without much trouble. Their roots settled quickly in the cool soil, and even after the first snow, their blooms often kept their color. Beds near porches or walkways were brightened by patches of purple, yellow, and blue when the rest of the yard looked bare. The trick was to plant them early enough in fall for the roots to take hold, then let them rest under winter's cover. By spring, they were among the first flowers to bloom, often opening weeks before anything else in the garden. Children enjoyed spotting their cheerful faces peeking through patches of melting snow. It was a reminder that gardens weren't only about survival, but also about beauty that carried families through the hardest months. Compost and mulch garden beds. Before winter settled in, beds were dressed with whatever compost was ready and a thick blanket of mulch. Kitchen scraps that had been turned all summer, along with barnyard manure and leaf mold, were spread across the soil to feed it through the quiet months. A cover of straw, leaves, or even corn stalks went on top, protecting the surface from washing away in rain or cracking in hard frost. This layer worked slowly, breaking down while snow lay heavy above it. By spring, what looked rough in October had turned into rich, dark soil, ready for another year's planting. Families who tended their compost piles knew the value of this extra step. It saved money, improved yields, and meant the garden's strength grew a little each season. October work with a fork and wheelbarrow built fertility that lasted long after winter passed. Water trees and shrubs before freeze. The last step before winter was often the simplest. Trees and shrubs were given a deep watering in October just before the ground froze solid. Roots could not draw from frozen soil, and without enough stored moisture, many plants would suffer or die back when spring returned. Families carried buckets from the pump or ran hoses to orchards and hedges, soaking the ground until it was soft and dark. Young trees especially needed the extra care, their roots still shallow and easy to dry out. Once watered well, the soil was mulched with straw or leaves to hold the moisture in place. By the time frost locked the earth, those roots had what they needed to last through winter. It was a quiet chore, but one that made the difference between weak growth and healthy branches in the year ahead. Nature always had a way of teaching lessons, and these October planting tricks prove it. Simple steps, done at the right time, carried families through winter when little else grew. If you enjoyed learning about these forgotten methods, give this video a hype and subscribe so more people can keep these old traditions alive. See you in the next video.